Good morning, Miss E.
Good morning, class. I'm Miss Ian. I hope you guys have already watched the video, last video. If you haven't, I will put the link here. You may watch the video first. So today I will be showing the solutions to the puzzle which is shared in the last video. So the puzzle goes like this. There are 4 athletes run in a 100-meter race and make the following statements. Andy says that I'm the fastest. Bryan says that I'm the slowest. Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest. Danny says that I'm not the fastest. So if exactly 3 of them are telling the truth, who is the slowest? So as what I explained in the last video, what I will do is in order to solve this puzzle, I will construct a diagram and make assumptions like Andy is the slowest and study these conversations to check whether this assumption is valid. If it's not valid, then we move on to the next assumptions. Maybe Bryan is the slowest and study the conversations again. So first, I will need to draw this diagram. So the first assumption is A is the slowest. So we try to study their conversation. So I will just put A, B, C, D. Okay, now our first assumption is A is the slowest. And what A says is, Andy says, I'm the fastest. But now our assumption is Andy is the slowest, but he said that he is the fastest. So he was actually lying. So I will just put a cross here. He's lying, but he is the slowest, but he said he's the fastest. And then Bryan says that I'm the slowest. Again, Bryan is not telling the truth because now our assumption is Andy is the slowest. But now Bryan says that he is the slowest, which means Bryan also not telling the truth. So I put a cross here. And the rest of the conversations we do not need to go through according to this puzzle, there are 3 of them telling the truth, which means if there are 3 of them telling the truth and there are 4 persons, which means 1 of them is lying. So you can see in these first assumptions where A is the slowest, we have 2 people lying. But in this puzzle, it says that only 1 of them is lying, which means this first assumption is not valid. Then we move on to the next assumptions where Bryan is the slowest. So next, I'm going to put down B, which represents Bryan is the slowest. Okay, if Bryan is the slowest, okay, let's try to study these conversations. And Andy say, I'm the fastest. Okay, since our assumption is only B is the slowest, Andy says that he is the fastest. He could be telling truth. He could be telling lie. So for this, we are not sure. And then the next, Bryan says that I'm the slowest. And our assumption is really Bryan the slowest. So which means Bryan is really telling the truth. So I will just put a tick here for Bryan telling truth, but Andy, we are not sure. And then Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest. So this could be lie, and this could be true. So we are not sure about this. Let's go to Danny. Danny says, I am not the fastest. Since our assumption is B the slowest, we have no idea who is the slowest. So for Danny also, we have no idea whether he is telling truth or he is lying. So in these situations, we can see that by making assumptions that B is the slowest seems not enough. Then for these assumptions, we need to make further assumptions. So what I will do is I will put out 2 possibilities here. So our first assumption is B is the slowest. And then next, further to this, I make another assumption, maybe Andy. Let's say I assume that Andy is telling the truth. So I just put A is, and then I put a tick, Andy is telling the truth. Or another possibility is Andy is lying. So I just put a cross here. So this is further to our previous assumptions. And we try to study the conversations. So now, so since we assume that Andy is telling the truth, so I will just put the tick here. And we are assuming that Bryan is the slowest. So Bryan says that I'm the slowest. So I put the tick here. Bryan is really the slowest. These are our assumptions. And Bryan said he's the slowest. So he's actually telling the truth. And then when we assume Andy is telling the truth, which means we are assuming that Andy is the fastest. Because Andy says that I'm the fastest. Andy says that I am the fastest. And we are assuming that he is telling truth. So we know that we are assuming that Andy is the fastest and Bryan is the slowest. So in these first situations, remember we are assuming that Andy is the fastest and Bryan is the slowest, and we study the next two conversations. So Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest, which means Calvin is really telling the truth, because now our assumption is Andy is the fastest and Bryan is the slowest. And Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest, which means he's telling the truth. So I will just put tick here. And then Danny says that I'm not the fastest, which means he is also telling the truth, because now the fastest is Andy. So I'll put the tick here. So by making these assumptions where B is the slowest and A is telling truth, which means A is the fastest, then we have 4 persons telling truth. But the pastor says that only 3 of them telling truth, which means this assumption is again not valid. How about if we assume that Andy is lying? So I'll put a cross here. If we assume that Andy is lying, which means Andy is not the fastest, because Andy say I'm the fastest and he is lying, which means Andy not the fastest. And then we are assuming that B is the slowest and Bryan says that I'm the slowest, so we can put a tick here. So when we make these assumptions, now we are assuming that Bryan is the slowest and Andy not the fastest, because Andy says that he's the fastest and we are assuming that he's lying. So Andy not the fastest and Bryan is the slowest. So if we are assuming that Andy not the fastest and Bryan also not the fastest, because Bryan now is the slowest. So if Andy is not the fastest, Bryan is not the fastest, then the fastest has to be either Calvin or Danny. The fastest has to be either Calvin or Danny. So let's look at this conversation. Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest. So Calvin says that he is not the fastest. And then Danny also says that I'm not the fastest. But Calvin and Danny also say that they are not the fastest. Seems like there's nobody fastest here. So which means it's either Calvin or Danny is lying. So I'll put either C or D is lying. So I just put a cross here. So in these assumptions, we will have more than one person telling lie. But in this puzzle, there's only one of them telling lie. So these assumptions where B is the slowest again is not valid. Then we move on to the next assumptions where C is the slowest. So if Calvin is the slowest, okay, then you read these conversations again. Calvin is the slowest now. Andy says that I'm the fastest. So we are not sure about this statement, whether it is true or false, because we only assume that Calvin is the slowest. And then Bryan says that I am the slowest. But now our assumption is Calvin is the slowest. But then Bryan says he is the slowest. So which means Bryan is lying. And then Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest. That's what Calvin said. But now our assumption is Calvin is the slowest. But he said that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest, which means Calvin is lying. So I put the cross here. And then Danny says that I'm not the fastest. So it could be a lie, it could be true. So we are not sure about this, but we do not need to study the other two conversations, because now we have 2 crosses, which means there are 2 people telling lie. But in this puzzle, there's only 1 people telling lie. So again, C is the slowest. This assumption is not valid again. So come to the last assumptions where Danny is the slowest. D is the slowest. Okay, so if Danny is the slowest and Andy say I am the fastest, so again, it could be a lie, it could be true, we are not sure. And then Bryan says that I'm the slowest, but now our assumption is Danny is the slowest. But Bryan says that I'm the slowest, which means Bryan is telling lie. And then Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest. So it could be true, it could be a lie. So we are not sure about this. And then Danny says that I am not the fastest. Now our assumption is Danny is the slowest. And he says that he's not the fastest, which means he's really telling the truth. So I'll put a tick here. So I have one cross and one tick. The other two persons, which is Andy and Calvin, we are not sure whether they are telling true or lie. So they are, maybe I can list out all the 4 possibilities here. So it could be, okay, down this first. So for statement made by Bryan and Danny, we are sure Bryan is lying and we are sure Danny is telling the truth. But Andy and Calvin, we are not sure. So there are 4 possibilities. It's either Andy and Calvin both are lying. So I'll put 2 crosses here. Or it could be Andy is lying, but Calvin is telling the truth. Or it could be Andy telling the truth and Calvin is lying. Or it could be Andy and Calvin both telling the truth. So these are all the 4 possibilities. But as you can see from these 4 possibilities, the first 3 possibilities, we have more than one person telling lie. We have more than one person telling lie for the first 3 possibilities. But the question says that there's only one person telling lie, which means the first 3 possibility is not valid. So maybe the 4th possibility, this is the one that could be valid to this puzzle. So to check whether it is valid, we try to study the conversations again. Okay, so now we have to look at this one. Okay, this could be the answer. So now in these assumptions, we are assuming that Andy is telling the truth. There's a tick here. Andy is telling the truth. And Andy says that I am the fastest. So which means Andy is in the first place. Okay, I'll put A. And then the second statement made by Bryan, we assume that Bryan is lying. Okay, and Bryan says that I'm the slowest. But now Bryan is not the slowest because Danny is the slowest. So if Bryan is not the slowest, he could be either in the 2nd place or the 3rd place. So I put, it could be in the 2nd place or Andy first, followed by another person. Then the 3rd place is Bryan. Okay, and then the 3rd statement made by Calvin, which we assume Calvin is telling the truth. And Calvin says that I'm neither the slowest nor the fastest, which means Calvin can either be in the 2nd place or the 3rd place. So can be in the 3rd place, can be in the 2nd place. And then the last statement made by Danny, which is I'm not the fastest, and our assumption is Danny is the slowest. So in this order, Danny is the slowest. Seems like this assumption is valid because according to this order, no matter Bryan in the 2nd place or in the 3rd place, or no matter Calvin in the 3rd place or the 2nd place, Danny is always the slowest. So our last assumptions where Danny is the slowest is valid, which is the answer to this puzzle. So I will just put D. So Danny is the slowest. That's the solutions. I hope you guys find this very interesting. And if you do, you may share this video with your friends. And you may get your friends to subscribe my channel. So that then you guys will be notified whenever there's a new video release. So see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.